accepted the responsibility to protect.
On atrocity prevention.
Words kill.
All societies are potentially vulnerable.
Atrocity crimes.
Timely and appropriate action.
Welcome to Expert Voices on Atrocity Prevention by the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. I'm Jacqueline Streitfeld-Hall, Research Director at the Global Center. This podcast features one-on-one conversations with practitioners from the fields of human rights, conflict prevention, and atrocity prevention. These conversations will give us a glimpse of the personal and professional side of how practitioners approach human rights protection and atrocity prevention, allowing us to explore challenges, identify best practices, and share lessons learned on how we can protect populations more effectively. I'm here today with Ahmad Helmi, co-founder and manager of the TAFI initiative. Thank you for joining us today, Ahmad.
Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for hosting me.
I just wanted to get started by asking, as a Syrian human rights defender, what led you to founding your organization?
That is a long story, but I myself was an activist since the beginning of the Syrian revolution in 2011, and I had I would call it a brother in arm, even though that we were both nonviolent person. And we used to share every moment, used to cry after every demonstration we organized. I remember one of the demonstrations we organized when we had over 10,000 participants in that demonstration. We were standing at some car to watch the huge numbers, and we both cried at that moment. He is my best friend, and he was kidnapped, disappeared by the Syrian regime in July 2011. And I continued fighting for the same cause we were fighting for together, for a democratic Syria that respects the human rights. And he was taken to the Sinai prison, which is the worst prison on earth at the moment. After that, I was myself detained or kidnapped and disappeared by the Syrian regime as well, due to my nonviolence activism. And I spent 3 years in prison. When I went out, the only concern that I had in mind is the fate of my best friend. His name is Islam, and I kept waiting for him. When I was persecuted again by the Syrian regime, I had to flee to Turkey, and all I had in mind is the moment when my best friend Islam will be released and will be out, and the fact that I need to prepare for his release. And I started the TAFI initiative, which supports survivors of enforced disappearance and torture to continue their activism, to continue fighting for justice and for human rights for Syria. So I started this initiative on the premises that someday my best friend will be out and he will find the support that will allow him to peacefully continue fighting for justice and accountability.
Your initiative describes itself as being survivor-led and survivor-centered, which, its sort of origins, as you've explained, are very personal to you. Could you tell us more about the mission and work of TAFI initiative?
Yeah, actually, all of myself, our team, our board, all of our members are survivors of detention, enforced disappearance, and torture, and you will hear me repeating those 3 crimes over and over again during this episode. because in Syria, those crimes are interlinked, interrelated, and they all happen together. So almost every detainee is have been disappeared or is going to be disappeared and a victim of torture. So our mission is to at some point uh, achieve justice and accountability for Syria, to build a future for Syria that is built on democracy, on the values of democracy, human rights, where no one will be subjected to enforced disappearance and torture, to make sure that whatever happened to us is not going to happen to anyone else in the future of Syria, to give a meaning to the meaningless torture and atrocities that we have gone through.
What does survivor centered justice look like to you?
Like, generally speaking, in Syria, since the beginning of the revolution, whenever we hear the word justice, we always get referred to criminal accountability. Justice have always been for us as a criminal accountability. But when we organize ourselves as a survivors movement, and when we joined started a movement of families association, we called ourselves the Truth and Justice Charter Group, which include 10 Syrian families and survivors association. And when we started to think what justice is for us, we came up with a definition different than only criminal accountability, with a definition based on priorities that we see fits our satisfaction build up toward justice and toward a transitional justice. It's not one thing. For us, victim-centered or survivor-centered justice is something based on what those who need justice, those who have, who are the direct victims of the atrocities, how do they define justice? For us, the definition of justice is something like the battery on your phone, that you charge it and you build it 1% by 1% until you achieve the 100%, right? So for us, justice constitute many steps that starts with the first priority in Syria as to reveal the fate and whereabouts of the missing, to stop torture, to stop the unjudicial courts, while on the long term, the changes in laws and practices, the guarantees of non-reoccurrences and criminal accountability, reparation and remedy for victims. But it is all together to build the satisfactions of the satisfaction of victims, and for the Syrian society to move from conflict to a sustainable peace for Syria. And for me personally, justice is to give a meaning to whatever I have gone through. Because if you think about it, you can't find the meaning of how can a human being torture another human being in this way for that long of time, looking at them in the eyes. It doesn't make sense. You can't find an answer of why did this happen to me, why is this happening for us as victims of torture. But when you know that your journey will lead to guarantees that what happened to you will never happen to others, it will have a meaning. Whatever I have been through will have a meaning, and I will be fine with it.
You know, it's so moving how you frame it as being not just about criminal accountability. It's about something much bigger, and accountability looks like something that goes beyond just punishment of someone who committed a crime. Since you just mentioned the Truth and Justice Charter, I know that Tafi is one of the founding members. Could you explain the background of the charter and how it was written and what it calls for?
In 2019, TAFI and three other organizations or families association from the founders of the Truth and Justice Charter, we were doing a campaign in Brussels around Brussels conference, and we were meeting the UN Syria Special Envoy at the beginning of his mandate, Mr. Geir Pedersen, and we found that there is a kind of synergy between us. There is this kind of we finish each other sentences. So, for example, when I talk about the what is happening inside the prisons, Mariam Hallaq from Caesar Families Association, she finishes my sentence talking about what the families are facing outside the prison. So we draw a holistic picture of what is happening in those dungeons in Syria. And since that campaign, we started to coordinate with each other and to communicate with each other even more, to a point that we came to a point that we said, we don't need to discuss our tasks and our priorities period to each campaign and each meeting. Why not to set our vision for justice or our demands? We started with a simple demands paper, and it evolved during fights, conflicts, arguments, discussions, and the document evolved into what we call now the Truth and Justice Charter, and our relationships evolved into becoming one kind of family. We started as five associations of families and survivors, and now we are 10, and we have this kind of bond. This kind of we feel this. We have this unbreakable bond because we share the same hopes. We share the same pain. I can relate to whatever a mother in one of the associations is feeling toward her disappeared beloved one, and she can relate to whatever I have been through. So it evolved, and we came up with this final form of the Truth and Justice Charter, which is our vision for future justice and accountability, transitional justice process for Syria. What new we brought in that charter is we set our priorities for justice and accountability. We said that our first and main and priority is to reveal the fate and whereabouts of the disappeared in Syria, and to immediately stop torture. And we set a short-term justice, a mid-term justice, and long-term justice. We know that criminal accountability doesn't happen overnight. Guarantees of non-reoccurrences, changes in laws and practices, it takes time, and memorialization effort, it takes time. So that is on the long term, we work on it. While on the short term and on the immediate term, which also doesn't happen overnight, but we want to know the fates and whereabouts of our beloved ones and to stop torture immediately. So this how the Truth and Justice Charter evolved, and now we work on different campaigns, on a long-term campaigns together. We came up with the proposal on the international community to establish a new institution that will work on revealing the fate and whereabouts of the missing, which is our first priority, and we have been campaigning for that for almost 3 years.
I know that The idea for a mechanism like that has been endorsed by the UN Commission of Inquiry, as well as recently a UN Secretary General's report. Are you hopeful now that such an institution will be established? And what do you hope that kind of mechanism will look like and do?
I mean, hope is a dangerous concept, because I don't know, like, you feel like hope will keep you waiting and hoping. Maybe I'm wrong, but for us, it's not a hope. It's mandatory thing, and we will not stop until we get there. And there is something known about families and victims associations, that we are hard-headed and we are annoying, and we, like, for a mother who kept fighting to find the fate of her son, she will never stop. Like Fadwa Mahmoud, she have been waiting for to know any answer about her son and her husband for 10 years now, or 11 years now, and she never lost hope. So it's for her, it's not hope, it's a fight that will end by us getting what we want. And so, yeah, it's not hope, it's gonna happen sooner or later. We have the international interest and the intention, the attention, and we have the momentum now, and we have paved the road toward building this institution. And what we are still waiting is only the technicalities of UN member states to come together and to table a resolution that will create such an institution. When it comes to what is gonna do, to be honest, after 12 or 12 years of the Syrian conflict, there is almost zero effort have been done on the search. The Syrian civil society have made a huge effort and advancement on the criminal accountability front, and we have seen that in practice and in test within the Koblenz trials, where the German court sentenced a mid-range Syrian official general who used to torture people and used to commit crimes against humanity. And that proves that we can not only hold the biggest criminals accountable for their crimes, not only the smallest ranks, but we can, like, we have enough evidences to hold the whole system accountable to their crimes. Yet, on the front of the search, there is almost zero effort have been done, and we hope, or we are willing to make this institution to start the search, to start the process of the search, to provide answers to the families, to provide, to track those disappeared, and to provide answers to the families in the coming years. It's not going to happen also overnight. Nothing in the mentality of justice happens overnight. We know it takes time, but we need it to start at least.
You've made reference to, the fact that you've joined together many groups of families, and with this need for research, I'm wondering if, for those who aren't familiar with the many layers of the conflict in Syria, can you give a sense of the scope of how many people are missing and detained and potentially being subjected to torture?
I mean, there is a very shy number, but it is based on documentation by the Syrian Network for Human Rights, a documentation organization. They have documented 120,000 disappeared in Syria, and those are not the number. Those this is the number of the disappeared at the moment that they could document. We know that the numbers is even more than that, way more than that. But that only answer the question of the number of disappeared, not the number of those who have been subjected to torture, because there are also thousands of survivors who have been subjected to torture. So the numbers goes like it skyrockets with that question. And this scale of enforced disappearance is unprecedented worldwide since the World War II, and it's the most complicated issue in Syria, and it's the biggest barrier to any future peace or future peace talks or current peace talks in Syria.
As we enter the 13th year of the crisis in Syria, what are your reflections on um, the past 12 years, and particularly the role of the international community in the Syrian conflict?
12 years is long time, and if you measure it with the conflict time, it's even longer. You know, I've spent 3 years of my life in prison, and for me it feels like 10 years. So if you ask me about my age now, I feel like I'm 40, and I think I have the wisdom of 20 years old person. Uh, but 12 years is a long time, and the international community, to be honest, have done nothing but financial support. We haven't seen any real uh, political willingness to end the conflict, and we know that the international community have made lots of donations and funding programs to Syria, but fund without political will doesn't end a conflict. And at some point, I thought that this is the capacity of the international community. This is their limitation. But when the Russian invasion to Ukraine happened, we saw that this is not the real limitation. We saw what is the best practices is, and we were shocked um by the reaction of the international community. I'm very happy that with the reaction on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but it is disappointing to see that is not the common practice. It's yeah, it's devastating.
Absolutely. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating to see everything that you've been told for a decade can't happen suddenly magically, like moving mountains over the course of 2 months when Ukraine first started. And I can say that it's frustrating to us from the perspective of an atrocity prevention organization, and I can't even imagine what it's like as a survivor of atrocities and someone who's actually living through a situation where atrocities are still ongoing, your family and friends are still affected, and still there's no movement. I think one thing we've seen a lot throughout the Syrian conflict, which maybe speaks to what you're saying about there's been a lot of funding but no political will to actually do much, is this sort of great power politics play out. The Syrian conflict, a lot of um, what we've witnessed from the international community and the lack of action often comes from these tensions within the Security Council. And I think one of the problems with that perspective is that um, there aren't a lot of voices of survivors in Security Council conversations. Um, so I'm wondering, how can the international community better support Syrian survivors from your perspective and the actual Syrian populations who are most affected by this conflict?
I mean, we need a real political will to end the conflict, and we need the international community to see the Syrian conflict not as a conflict way far away, not a conflict in the Middle East where the conflicts always happens. It's the devastating outcomes of the Syrian conflict have directly influenced um, the whole world, because the impunity that Russia have enjoyed after the atrocities it did in Ukraine in 2014 and in Syria since 2015 have have spreaded, the culture of impunity have spreaded in the region and around the world, and that made it easy for Russia to know that they can invade Ukraine and they can commit crimes against humanity and nothing will happen. And now we see the results in every single household. No one is not affected by the gas prices, by the food crisis, by every outcome of the Russian invasion to Ukraine. And you can't delink it from the Syrian conflict. It's the same mentality, and it's just 1, 2, 3 equation. So how would they support? To be honest, at a short term, the support of the new international institution that we have been calling for is essential. It will provide a short-term and long-term contribution to satisfaction, to justice, to end the conflict in Syria. While on the long term, criminals should know that impunity does not exist. Accountability will happen someday, and at the moment, that is not the case. You remember how I started when I told you why I started this Ta'afi initiative to support my friend and those who I've left behind in prison, and this and we call it Ta'afi because it means recovery, because those who are still in prison are the chances for Syria to recover from the 12 years of conflict. My best friend Islam, who I started Ta'afi initiative to support him when he is out, and in 2017, I was like, I met my girlfriend and we were planning a wedding, and I was postponing my wedding, waiting for him to get out. In 2018, we received a call saying that the Syrian regime have issued a death certificate for Islam, and he didn't get out, and we still don't have his remains. And after 7 years of waiting for him, it appeared that he died in 2013. And and we only knew by chance, by coincidence, after 5 years of his execution. So it's the establishment of the new institution is not a luxury. It's essential for Syria.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Expert Voices on Atrocity Prevention. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or Spotify, and would be grateful if you left us a review. For more information on the Global Center's work on R2P, mass atrocity prevention, and populations at risk of mass atrocities, visit our website at www.globalr2p.org and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook at GCR2P.